The world famous Thames River Joke. Alright, so once upon a time in a little land called England, there was this boy called James. And James was a teenager. He was in the 10th grade of school, which I believe they call the 6th grade school in England because they can't count. And he had a really big crush on this girl in his same class called Jamesina. And every time James saw Jamesina, he just had a little flutter in his heart. And he thought that, one day I'll work up the courage to ask young Jamesina out. And every day he would walk up to her and start stuttering, and Jamesina would look at him a little quizzically and say, "Oh, hello, James. Is there anything I can do for you?" And James just looks back a little bit surprised, and he just says, "No, nothing, miss. Go on your way." And Jamesina would say, "Oh, okay, well, you know where to find me, James, if you need anything. Bye-bye now." And she just walks off, and every time James would stomp his foot and go, "Oh, man, I lost my chance." I was like, "Oh, man, I lost my chance." So, and this would go on for months and months and months. And then finally, it was Easter Day, actually. James wakes up, and he looks in the mirror, and he says, "Right then, this is going to be the day where I ask out Jamesina. I'm doing it. I have to do it." So he gets up his courage, he works up the willpower, and he says, "I'm asking her out." So then they go to school, because in England they go to school on Easter Sunday. It's a normal England thing. And it starts out normally. They go to the first class together. You know, he tries to make nice eyes at her in algebra and stuff, but she doesn't really react to that. And so on, it keeps going, and then, another period comes by. He kind of tries to make a little bit of a move, kind of wink at her, but she's not picking it up. And then finally, the moment of truth arrives. It's lunch. They're having bangers and mash, as that's the only thing that people in England eat. Excuse me. And he says, "All right, then, time to license this TV." And he walks straight up to Jamesina, and he says, "I couldn't help that you weren't noticing you earlier, miss. And I noticed today, why, you look positively lovely. So I, if you do not mind, my miss, would like to proposition you to, have a little boat ride. You see, my father, he owns a boat rental company. He rents out rowboats all across the big Thames River there in London. And I was wondering if I couldn't take a pretty belle like you outside under the starlit nights just to enjoy the water and the river and all that, just to enjoy each other's company. I wouldn't be like, a date or anything per se, but just to be there enjoying each other's company and all that." And she says, well, I don't know. You're a pretty boy and all, but I'm kind of afraid of the water, if I'm being honest." And James looks back at her and says, "Oh, don't worry, dear. You'll be with a big, strong man like me. If you fall in, I'll promise I'll fish you out." And Jamesina looks back and says, "Oh, well, all right, I guess. When would you like to meet out there? I'm afraid I can't go tonight, because my family has invited me to the Easter ball." And James looks back and says, "Oh, is that right, little pretty miss? Well, see, as I figure, why don't we say next Tuesday, 10 o'clock sharp, on the docks?" Jamesina looks back on him and she says, "Why, that sounds positively delightful. I'd love to meet you there." So, time goes by. James works up his courage, and at 10 p.m. sharp, he's there waiting on the dock, waiting for his girl to arrive. But then it's 10:05 and she's not there yet. 10:10, no sight of her. 10:15, she isn't there. Now he's staring at his watch. 10:16, no. 10:17, no. 10:18, no. 10:19, no. 10:20, no. 10:21, no. 10:22, no. 10:23, no. But 10:24, at 10:24, 23 seconds, a black limousine shows up. And out steps Jamesina dressed in her absolute Sunday's best, even though, as we established, it wasn't a Sunday, it was a Tuesday. But out steps Jamesina, dressed up in her perfect Sunday best, and she says, "Why, hello there, James. I'm afraid I'm a little late. Ran into some traffic up the way." And James looks back and says, "Why, dear, with you dressed that pretty, I wouldn't mind if you showed up 3 hours late." And they both laugh. And they get out onto the boat together, and they sail off into the river. And they're just sitting there, rowing out peacefully into the river. James on the oars, and Jamesina looking back at him lovingly. And she says, "Why, James, you look so dashing in the moonlight." And James looks back at her and says, "Why, I could say the same to you, darling." And Jamesina looks at him back, and there's a little twinkle in your eyes. She says, "Well, I, I don't mean to be too forward here or anything, but I was wondering if you might not like to kiss a little bit, James, just a little bit. I don't think my father can see us from the shore." And James looks back at her and he says, "Why, dear, I think I would enjoy a little peck, just the once." And he smiles back at her deeply, and their eyes meet. And everything just goes quiet for a second. The water is still, the stars are frozen in place. And we have nothing but James and Jamesina on their still little placid river, just sitting there peacefully looking at each other with love in their eyes and satisfaction in their hearts. And as James slowly makes his way towards her, leans in just a bit more, her just instinctually leaning a little bit back, but she wants it. He leans in, he grabs a hold of her arm, and bang! All of a sudden, giant sea monster comes out of the lake, swallows them whole. They were never seen alive again. So there was another man named James in England. Oh, this James, we'll call him James 2, was about 36 years old. He worked as a ship painter. What he would do every day is he would go out onto the river and... This is a good joke, Cheeky, I swear. He would go out onto the river, and his job was to paint the ships as they came down the river. He was a ship painter by trade. His daddy was a ship painter, and his daddy a ship painter before him. And all of a sudden, James 2 gets the biggest contract he's ever had of his life. Normally, he just paints small boats, tugboats. Occasionally, like a speedboat. Sometimes, when days are really good, he'd get medium-sized yachts from the rich people on the river. But all of a sudden, he gets commissioned to paint an entire cruise ship. An entire big cruise ship. This would be a huge amount of money for him. And he says, "Oh, I can't. I have to take this offer. I have to take this offer." And so he goes to the cruise ship company and says, "Well, I would like to paint. I would take the offer to paint one of your cruise ships." And the cruise ship company says, "Oh, well, okay, yeah, we got one out in the river right now for you to go paint." And James looks at it and says, "This could be my big break. If people in the cruise ship industry see how well I'm painting these cruise ships, I could go a long way." So he stares at the cruise ship for a while, and he just conceptualizes, how am I going to paint this? I think I'm going to go with like a nice green color, I think would be nice. It would match the ocean waves, even though the ocean is blue. So he walks out there and he starts painting, and he's been painting for hours, and he just steps back on the shore just to see what he's done so far. And man, he doesn't even have a 20th of it done. This is going to be such a long job. And it's about that time James 2 starts thinking, I should really hire some more people to do this. You know, it's really slow just me painting this entire big cruise ship by myself. So he makes a mental note. After this job, hire more help. And he works and works some more. And the day finishes and he's not really any closer to his goal. Comes back out the next day, paints. And for 40 days of straight work, James is out there slowly painting the cruise ship. Very slowly. The progress takes so long. And on the 41st day, he's so close to finished. There's so little of the ship left to paint. And he paints a little bit more and a little bit more. And he doesn't want to go home because it's so close to done and he wants to be done with it today. It's Friday. Easter Sunday's coming up. And he just paints the ship and paints the ship and paints some more and keeps going. The city falls asleep. Night falls. He's still painting and painting. And then at last, 15 minutes before midnight, the last coat of paint goes onto the cruise ship. And he just goes right back out to shore. And he admires his work. And he says, "Why, I painted this entire cruise ship." And he says, "Wait a minute, I missed a spot." And he notices there's just a little itty bit of spot on the front of the cruise ship that wasn't painted yet. He was going to go get it. And then he was going to go home, enjoy his Easter weekend with his family and all his newfound cruise ship painting money. And he sails back out on his little rowboat towards that cruise ship one more time. And he goes towards the little patch he hasn't painted yet. And he starts painting, and he paints it over. And then he stops and looks, and it's perfect. It's complete. It's the best ship painting job he's ever seen. And he's just so proud. And he just sits there and admires his work and he knows that the money from that cruise ship painting will feed his family for years. He is set now in the highly competitive world of ship painting. He is set. And he just sits on the boat for a little while, just taking it all in, and then bam! Sea monster pops up out of the river, eats him whole. That's it. Now you see, there were other people on the cruise ship. Nobody saw it happen, but they noticed that the rowboat was there one moment and gone the next. So they go, and they file a missing persons report with the London Police Department, the LPD. And the man picks up the phone and says, "Hello, this would be the London Police Department." And the people on the cruise ship, "We'd like to call in a missing persons report. Ship painter just went missing off the bow of the Discovery cruise ship." And the London Police Department says, "Oh, really? Now this is the second case of people disappearing in the Thames River we've had reported to us. That's very odd. We'll look into this, madam." And he hangs up the phone, and he looks around the department and says, "Get me Sarge immediately." And then Sarge bursts into the room with his badge on, and he says, "What do you want, dispatch?" And dispatch says, Sarge, I got some news. We got a follow-up on the case of James Whittaker. There's been another disappearance on the Thames in the same exact place on the river." And Sarge goes, "Well, then, that does seem like a pattern. Why don't you, perhaps, stake out another one of your men out on the river tonight? See if you can't locate the scene of our misdeeds. Perhaps there's a serial killer working in this part of the river." And so a crack squadron of LPD commandos go out and onto the river for a stakeout. And it's 10 p.m. now. And the crack spondo, the squad waits out in unmarked cars all around the river, all along the scene of the crime. Just waiting for someone to show up. And they decide, we're going to send two of our best operatives out on the rowboat in order to draw the killer out of his hiding place. So two of LPD's finest get on a rowboat and row out into the middle of the river, and they're in disguise. They're pretending to be a young couple in love, much like the curious case of James and Jane Zeno. And they sit out there, and they're pretending to have a good time. They're pretending like they're not paying attention to the surroundings. But in actuality, they're watching very, very, very carefully. And it goes on for hours like this, and they watch, and they're not seeing very much. And then all of a sudden on the rowboat, they notice a weird little ripple coming up from the surface. It's just odd because it looked like almost like a little stone dropped into the river. But they were in the middle of this big river. How could there be a little ripple this far out? And they look at it and they radio back to shore and they say, "Wow, well, seems to be a little bit of subaquatic activity in this area. We should look at this carefully." And the soldier responds and says, "Not soldier, policeman. These are policemen, not soldiers." The policeman responds and says, "Aye, aye, we'll have a forensic team take a look at it." And then they just sit there, and they notice the ripples are getting bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, there's this shimmering black thing under the water. And it's just swirling back and forth all around them. They're starting to become really scared. And they radio it in and say, "Dispatch, there seems to be a large aggravation going on under the water surface here. You might want to get us out." And all of a sudden, bam! Giant sea monster, straight out of the river, eats them whole, never seen again. And now, all of the policemen in the river are horrified. They've seen it happen. They know what's happened. There is a sea monster in the River Thames. They are horrified. Everyone runs for the hills, and the next morning it's all over the papers. It's a disaster for the English government. No one wants to set foot in the river. People are scared to walk around near it. Completely shuts down the city. Everyone moves away miles and miles from the river, scared of being the next victim of the Beast of Thames, as it became the sea monster came to be known in the press. And the Prime Minister of England calls a secret tribunal of all the other cities in England, and they all come together, and the Prime Minister of England sits at the head of the table and he says, "Now, gentlemen, you well know why I've called you here today. For you see, we have a little bit of a pest control problem. I was wondering if you might be willing to spare the naval resources to take a look at our so-called Beast of Thames." And all of the other officials look back at the Prime Minister and they quiver in fear and they say, "Oh, we can't send the Navy to you. It's a monster. We can't fight the monster." And the Prime Minister says, "Oh, nonsense. There's no monster in our river. What are you talking about? It's fine." And they say, "Oh, all right, fine. I guess there's probably not a monster." So they gather it all together, and they get a whole big fleet of boats together. Half the nation's navy gathers together, and they form up a convoy, and they all go sailing up and down the river every night, looking for the beast. They got sonar working, they're looking underneath the water for it, all that stuff. Never see anything. Nights and days go by, and nights and days, and nights and days, and nights and days. And they never see anything. Weeks go by, and they keep doing this. And slowly, less than ships start showing up because they're needed in other places, and they think, well, there's nothing happening here. We're not going to waste our navy on just sailing up a river that has nothing going on. So less and less ships, and until one day, there's only one lone battleship left wandering up and down the river. Just the one ship, just going back and forth. And they're bored. They're not paying super good attention anymore. They've given up on the monster hunting mission they originally set off on. They're not even looking anymore. It becomes a national embarrassment if anything. And they're out there, the last day of their assignment. They're giving up after tonight. They want to be done with it. People are convinced the beast no longer exists. And at the crack of midnight, as they're making their way out of the river for the last time, bang! Monster pops up, eats the whole ship whole. They're all dead. And it's all over the papers again. People are terrified again. People know it's there now. An entire battleship went under. How could it not be there? Mass hysteria reigns. People start wondering if there aren't beasts like this in other rivers. People run away from rivers in general. Mass exodus, panic on the street. Something needs to be done. And the British Navy and the British Army come up with a cunning strategy. They're going to load up a ship full of explosives. Nobody on the ship. Just nothing but explosives. And they're going to send it out into the middle of the water. And they're going to let the beast bite this seemingly normal ship that's actually full of explosives. And camouflaged on the side of the river, they're going to have tanks and missile commands and all this stuff. Just waiting for the beast to show its head or thorax or tentacle or whatever this beast has. Because no one really knows. Because no one's really seen it before. And they sit there and lie in wait. Thousands and thousands and thousands of British troops and missiles and guns just sitting, lying in wait for the famed Beast of Thames to make its appearance. And they wait. And it isn't biting. And it's 11 o'clock and it still isn't biting yet. 11:30, it still hasn't bit. 11:40, it still hasn't bit. 11:45, it still hasn't bit. 11:50. 11:51. 11:52. 11:53. 11:54. 11:55. 11:56. 11:57. 11:58. 11:59. And then BAM! Eaten by a sea monster. And the sea monster blows up. It eats the ship and blows up. Everyone on the shores is shooting at it. And it disappears under the water. And there's a big cloud of red under the water. And everything's a mess. And they think, we got it. We got it. And there's celebrations out on the shoreline. Everyone's hooping and hollering. The beast is dead. We did it, fellas. High fives all around. And then all of a sudden, bam. One of the tanks just disappears. Sloshed into the water. And then another one goes. Bam. And then another one. Bam. And then another one. Bam. And then another one. Bam. Before they know it, the entire army is gone. All sucked back into the briny depths. Even though it's a river and it's fresh water. But it's now briny with human blood. And it's a disaster. People are in full-out panic. The entire island of England becomes uninhabited because people run away to Ireland. True story. And the English government, what's left of it, in exile in Ireland, is now in pure-on panic. They call a meeting of the European Union, the High Council of Europe. And they say, well, we've used all our army resources here. We need some help. And every other country at the table says, no, we're not touching that. No, go away. We don't want the monster in our territory. Leave it alone. Just let the island die. And then all of a sudden, the last country to speak, sitting in the back of the room, as they often do, smoking a cigarette, who else but the French delegation. And the diplomat from France just simply puffs his cigar twice, looks up at the ceiling, traces a little circle with his fingers, and then quietly speaks up, gets the attention of the rest of the room, and says, I see. We may have a specialist who may deal with this little problem of yours, you see, but he is a shall we say, a very selective creature. You're going to need to make it worth his while. And the British delegation looks back at him and then back at each other and back at each other. It says, is this guy serious? One man, after we sent our entire army to kill this monster, the French think that one man can kill this guy. And they say, well, of course he can. We're not going to waste our time on this ridiculous plan. And then they start looking at each other and they say, well, it's the only option we've got. And what harm can it do? Worst case scenario, it's one more Frenchman dead. And then they all look back at each other and, yeah, that is, oh, okay, yeah. And then they look back at the French guy and said, fine. You want your specialist to come in, we'll give him anything he wants, so long as he gets rid of the beast problem. He can do whatever he wants, gets whatever he wants. And the French diplomat just sits back in his seat and says, excellent. Well, we will be in touch then. And he just throws down a smoke bomb, disappears in a puff of smoke, and there's nothing but a single baguette left on the floor. Weeks passed, and the English government has had no contact with their specialist. This specialist, they would promise, would solve their beast control problem for them. They promised that he would show up and solve it for them. He never shows up. Weeks and weeks pass, and they wait for him, and they wait for him, and they wait for him. 3 whole months pass. No sign. And they're about to give up. And then one uneventful Wednesday morning, a small man in a white button-up top and checkered pants walks up to the British government building. And he says, yes, I am Monsieur Henry. I have been sent to deal with this, shall you say, sea monster problem. I was told there would be compensation for me. And they look back at him and they say, this little guy, can't hardly be 5'2", no weapons in sight, no team around him, no heavy munitions. He's the specialist. And they say, well, you know what? A deal's a deal. And they say, all right, Henry, what would you require for your services? And Henri looks back at them and he says, I have but 3 requests. Number 1, you shall provide to me a military bunker within your country. I want an aircraft hangar's worth of space. And no one shall ask me why I need this space. Number 2, I must be allowed to do with the beast as I see fit. He will be gone from your river, but I take it from there. You will not see the beast again. And number 3, no one, and I mean no one, can watch me work. I work alone. Do you understand me? And the British government looks and says, that's it? No money, no accolades, no fortune. And Henri says, none of the sort. I do not want to be watched. I do not want to be publicized. I do not want to be anything. I must work in silence. All I require of you is an aircraft hangar and complete secrecy. And they say, well, all right then, Henry. He seems to strike at midnight. You're free to go out there any night you want. And Henry says, excellent. I shall also need a military escort to the shores to ensure that nothing funny happens along the way. But once I arrive, you may not look. And suddenly the fateful night comes. Henry is sitting on a military transport on his way out to the river. And all of the British troops sent there to escort Henry on the way to the river are making fun of him, making little faces at the short little French guy who's supposedly going to fix the beast problem that the entire army couldn't solve before. And they're making fun of him and making faces at him and says, hey, short stuff, you're really going to fix the problem? And Henry doesn't say a word. He just glowers back at them. And then they reach the shores of the river. Henry gets out of the military jeep. He sets foot on the ground. He spits. And he says, filthy English weather. All right, I do my work now. No one must watch. And as instructed, all the British troops turn around and look the other way. But of course, while he's not looking, they crane their head back to look to see what's happening. And they see Henry stand at the shore for a good 10, 15 seconds, just staring off into the water, not doing anything in particular. And then he reaches down, feels the water between his fingertips, licks a little bit off his fingers, seems to be taking in the water, seems to be examining it. And then he spins around in a little circle, and he reaches into his coat pocket, and he pulls out a huge meat cleaver. A huge cleaver. And he just walks off into the water. Very slowly. First he's got his ankles into the water. Now he's got his hips into the water. Now he's got his waist into the water. Torso. Shoulders. And his head is finally completely under the water. And nothing happens. Nothing happens at all. They're staring at it. They see a little ripples here and there, but that's it. The water is as clear as day. If you didn't know any better, you'd think it was a normal river that didn't have a short French man or a giant short French man eating beast within that river. And it stays like that for minutes, and all of a sudden, a huge amount of bubbles come up to the surface, and it looks like somebody put some bubble bath soap or something in the river. And the soldiers all think, oh, there goes poor Henry. Idiot thought he could take care of what Britain's finest couldn't. And it stays like that for multiple more minutes, and they say, well, we certainly ain't going fishing for the body, not with the beast of Thames in their water. And then, all of a sudden, comes trudging out of the water, who else but Henri, with a bloody wet cleaver and a look of determination on his face. And as they see him start to surface, all of the troops remember their promise and turn around and pretend like they haven't seen anything. And Henri simply looks around and says, Monsieur, you may look again. The work is done. You should have no more beast trouble on this river. You will not hear from me again. And he simply walks off into the sunset. And that's it. They very gingerly send a rowboat, an empty rowboat, out onto the water. You may ask, how did the rowboat get out into the middle of the water with nobody on the rowboat? Since it's a rowboat, and the only way it propels itself is by rowing, which couldn't have happened because no one was on the boat. So now the rowboat is in the middle of the river, and they just sit there, and everyone waits. They see if anything happens to the rowboat. And nothing ever happens. It's there all night. Come morning, the rowboat is still out there in the middle of the water. And the next night, they still aren't convinced. They send the rowboat out again. And it still's fine. And this goes on for weeks with progressively larger and larger and larger boats. And a few weeks pass and they realize Henri was right. The beast really is dead. The river is safe. And there is a widespread celebration and people move back into their houses in London. And all of this, and people wonder who the mysterious hero was who saved the day. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, an announcement from the French government comes in. And they say, yes, the hero of the so-called Beast of Thames was none other than our renowned celebrity chef, Henri Lafontaine, who is now opening his new exquisite sausage restaurant in suburban Paris. Come get yours, taste the food cooked by the mastermind behind the slaying of the beast of the Thames on the filthy British Isles. And as promised, he opens a new restaurant in the suburbs of Paris. And it's a huge hit with the fans. They love his peas with crème fraîche. They love his duck l'orange. They love his ratatouille. They love his chicken Kiev. They love his rat fricassee. They love almost everything on the menu. But the star of the menu, what really drives in the big bus, is a special sausage restaurant. A special sausage recipe right at the top of the menu. Henri's special bratwurst. And it becomes known as a French sausage restaurant. And people from all over the country, all over the world, come to Henri's place to taste this delightful bratwurst. And that's not an innuendo. And it goes on like this for a month. And Henri becomes one of the richest men in the world, selling his delicious broth. And naturally, with time and with exposure, people begin to wonder, how does he cook this amazing sausage? This is the best sausage I have ever had. How does he do it? And Henri has countless interviews, countless magazine pieces, TV spots, everything you can name. People come up to Henri and say, how do you prepare that sausage? What's the casing made out of? What do you season it with? Where's the meat come with? How do you plate it? All these questions. And Henri, every time, simply looks back at them and gives a little coy smile and says, I'm afraid the secrets of a French master cannot be so easily revealed. And it goes on like this for months and months and months. People desperate to know where Henri's magical bratwurst is coming from. And no one ever knows. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, the bratwurst is not as good anymore. People begin noticing this doesn't taste like it used to. This isn't as good anymore. This is still a good sausage, but I wouldn't spend this much money for it. What's wrong, Henri? And he says, "Oh, we're just testing a new recipe. I see the new one is not as popular. We shall go back within a few weeks." And people say, "Oh, all right. Well, it's still a pretty good sausage, and I appreciate the attempt to innovate, but I like the old recipe better." But then a few weeks pass, and it's still not very good. People are still noticing this isn't the bratwurst I used to know and love. What's up, Henri? And he says, no, it is the same bratwurst. You simply do not remember because it has been too long since you have eaten the old recipe. You can confuse it with the new one. Why don't I just switch to the new recipe permanently? You like it better anyway, I'm sure. People say, no, we want your old bratwurst. What was wrong with that? It was delicious. And Henri says, no. We go to new one. We go to new one. It is better. Trust Chef Henri. And people are so disappointed and so angry for the chef depriving them of their absolute favorite bratwurst they've ever had. And all of a sudden, his restaurant tanks in the papers. His reviews go way down. Everyone is so angry at the chef for disavowing his roots, for making a worse sausage than he made before. And all of a sudden, there's a team of investigative journalists that wants to know what happened to the old sausage restaurant recipe. What's going on at Henri's? Why have the sausages gotten so different all of a sudden? And they actually hire a mole within Henri's restaurant. They hire the security guy who's in charge of the security cameras within the restaurant. He watches the security tapes all day long. They record onto these big tape racks that they save within the restaurant. And they have years and years of archival footage from within the restaurant to outside the restaurant, by the shipping and receiving dock, to the front of the restaurant, full coverage everywhere. And they pay good money to receive these tapes. And they pour through the footage. And they noticed something peculiar happening. Chef Henri's new sausage recipe, that's just made with normal pork. They got a normal shipment of normal sausage meat in, but Chef Henri's old recipe, they were getting shipments of this really weird looking black meat that no one really recognized what it was. And they begin looking at the vans that are taking it in, and they can't track the registration of those vans to any known butcher. They don't know where the meat is coming from. And they say, all right, well, we're going to track these vans, see where they've gone. And they track one of the vans, and they found out for years it had been making weekly deliveries to the restaurant from an unknown location in the north of England. It was driving through the Channel Tunnel down to Paris, making shipments every week to this Henri's restaurant, but they don't know what it was shipping. They knew it had that black meat, but they didn't know what it was. So they tracked their address. They track it, and it turns out it's an abandoned military hangar. It's an old Royal Air Force hangar, been empty for years, moss and everything growing on it. And they don't know what's wrong with that. Why are these vans coming from the seemingly abandoned old Air Force hangar? And why are they making deliveries to Henri's restaurant? So they decide to take the boldest step of them all. They're going to break and enter onto this old abandoned air hangar. See if they can find anything sneaky going on. This will be the scoop of the lifetime if they see something. And a group of reporters get together and they all pile into a van. And they all quietly head up the country, heading for this abandoned hangar. And they get there and they park a few miles out to not draw suspicion. And they very slowly walk along the road, just looking like hitchhikers or something, not trying to draw attention to themselves. And they get to the hangar. And they arrive at the outskirts of the hangar. And they notice that there's nobody on the site. There's nobody here keeping a watch. So they, as quickly and as subtly as they can, they jump the fence. They get onto the premises. They see the hangar. There it is, the big hangar. And they walk very slowly to it, keeping an eye out for anybody watching their tracks. And they don't see anything, and they walk a bit farther, stop forward, and they look around a bit more, and there's still nobody. The coast is still clear. And they walk a bit more, and they're almost there. They're about halfway there to this big, almost abandoned hangar that has been sending unknown shipments to Henri's restaurant. And they're almost there, and finally they get there. And they take a deep breath. They don't know what they're going to find. And they quietly sneak into the hangar. And as they look upon the big floor of the hangar laid out in front of them, they see something they never expected to find. There was a giant skeleton. A huge skeleton. An animal bigger than anything they've ever seen. Bigger than an elephant. Bigger than a whale. Had 12, 20, 24 arms. That many legs too. Flippers. Fins. All of it. And they saw it laid out in front of them as this huge hulking skeleton. And one by one, they all realized something horrifying. This is the Beast of Thames. Chef Henri had killed the Beast of Thames and then taken it to the secret aircraft hangar. And then they came to an even more disturbing conclusion. All the meat was taken off this huge skeleton. And it had been shipped to Henri's restaurant. And when those shipments stopped is when the sausage in the restaurant got so much worse. And they all stopped and looked at each other, and they came to the same conclusion at the same time. Chef Henri had been making his world famous bratwurst out of the corpse of the Beast of Thames. It was the Beast of Thames. It was the worst of Thames. Thank you very much.